Hello, this is Daniel Evans, and to whoever's watching, this is my week 2 sports video assignment, the reflection. First, I'd like to reflect and discuss sort of on some things that we discussed in class. First off, I thought about why men are likelier to quit when losing to women than women are to quit when facing either gender, and that's because due to the male dominated culture of sports, men feel like that they're humiliated if they lost to a woman because they're not as good as sports. Basically, a very bad problem of systemic sexism. So that's why they feel humiliated. It's basically systemic sexism. Also, when it comes to the median income being much lower for athletes than the vast salaries you see. Like Patrick Mahomes a year ago or 2 years ago got a $500 million contract, yet the median is only 50,000. Well, that I looked up and I realized how in the lower sports leagues, like say third division in Europe, third division hockey, the salaries are like really low, like barely livable. So that really could bring in a question how much of a lifestyle, like how good of a lifestyle the majority of athletes can get on the high salaries, which in many cases aren't that high, hence the median being so much lower than what we would expect. Also, in terms of esports, I think that it's its significance, for better or worse, is that it really brings in not just an online thing, but it's easier for people in places that might not be close to each other to connect. And that might be economically beneficial because it introduces more people. Also, it appeals to a wider audience. And those who aren't athletic, they can join. So, and they're pretty sure that you'd get a wider berth of customers if you included people who aren't athletic in any kind of sports. Also, it would have less effect on school time because like kids who study for school, they won't be as affected by sports like tournaments and stuff. Though the thing is, it probably for now has less opportunities for students after college, like in terms of jobs. But also, in terms of things that weren't discussed in class, things that I reflect on. First off, like people believe that major sports leagues, hate small markets because it means less money. Like for example, uh, the people believe that some people believe that the NFC Championship in the NFL in 2018/19 was rigged for the Rams to win so that they could get Los Angeles involved. This probably isn't true, but also people believe that the reason that in basketball it was always Cleveland versus Golden State in the championship for 4 years in a row, and people thought it was the NBA was rigging it so that'd just be two big markets. So that's one thing to dwell on. Also, on a more positive note, one example of positive economics and sports connecting is how in the US, one problem that Europe suffers from in their sports that the US doesn't is hooliganism, because in Europe, and especially in soccer, hooliganism at sports meets is a really big problem. Like, people have gotten killed. In some cases, it's been double digits, but these are rare. But in the U.S., due to all the sports leagues having great business connections with private security companies, this isn't nearly as much of a problem. There weren't even that many reported cases till like 10 years ago, less than that even. So it's an interesting example of how the business connections between private security companies and sports leagues not only have economic benefits for the security companies, but also keep people from getting hurt. And one thing I noticed that may or may not be economics related is how my brother talked with me about this, and I found it interesting how in many sports leagues, especially the National Football League, the reason that a bad general manager is less likely to be fired than a coach that might not even be bad if one of them has to be fired is because while the coach is more connected to the players and is likely the one less at fault, the general manager, who's in charge of a lot of things like drafting and salaries, is more connected to the owners of the team. So basically, it's a form of business connections coming out over competence. Also, one last thing I've thought about is how one of the more popular sports to come during the COVID outbreak, since a lot of sports leagues were delayed, is marble racing, which I've read became really popular. How people just raced marbles along lanes, sorry, and whoever rolled to the finish line first won. John Oliver did something about that, though I forget which video. And now for my two discussion questions. The first one is based on what I said before about people accusing sports leagues of hating small town markets, like what I mentioned, the NFL, because after the Rams won against the Saints in the championship on a due to a very questionable no call by the refs, there people accused the NFL of just wanting the big Los Angeles market and not the small New Orleans market to be invested in the Super Bowl. So, like, New Orleans viewership of the Super Bowl crashed by half, and also in basketball, as I mentioned, the four championships in a row were just two big market teams over and over. So my question is, what are some possible reasons that, other than this, that the sports leagues in the US and possibly Europe would be against competition / parity in their leagues? And it could be reasons totally different from this, but as I said, that's one of my questions. What are some possible reasons that sports leagues would be against competition / parity? The other question is, if the total revenue of sports is so small in comparison to both other industries in the US economy as a whole, like Miss Professor Rizzo spent a lot of time discussing that in class on Wednesday, then how come it seems to have such a large societal role compared to other industries? Like, we hear it in culture. I've heard one way for immigrants. A lot of stories have them getting involved by sports. In fact, my dad said that's what he did with my brother and I, because after our family moved to the U.S. when we were little. And does it have indirect economic significance / ties that exceed the physical or number values, the monetary values? Like, what are some notable indirect economic impacts it has? And those are my two questions. And before that was my reflection. Thank you for watching.